Perfect. All right, thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate you getting us live. We're going to call to order the special council meeting here on Monday, October 18th, 6:30 p.m. And due to COVID-19 restrictions, they'll be aired via Zoom. However, if anybody would like to ask any questions or provide any input, as always, you can email P Nopper, that's Nopper for Nopper, at townofstandrews.ca, and St. Andrews is with the ST. At this time, we're going to get into the recording of attendance. I note that all members of council are in attendance, with the exception of Councillor Gumichel, who will be traveling and returning back to St. Andrews over the next couple of days. I'll be looking for a motion to approve the agenda. Could I have a mover? And I see Councillor Heenan and seconded by Councillor Blanchard. Any discussion changes on the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor of the agenda, please signify by saying aye. And that is everybody. The agenda has been approved. At this point, we'll be looking for any disclosures of conflict of interest. And I'm seeing two, I believe. Councillor Neal.
Yeah, I'd like to declare a conflict with regards to the Wharf discussion around the biological station, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Neal. Anyone else? Councillor Blanchard.
Yeah, I'll be doing the same on the same issue.
Perfect. So Mr. Nopper, if you want to make note, obviously for the minutes, and you guys can recuse yourself when we get to E2 on that conversation. Is there anyone else before we move on? That is everybody. So at this point, we will get into presentations, although we kind of have one on budget tonight. That'll be under the introduction and consideration of passing of bylaws, which we're now into. And at this point, I'll pass it over to Mr. Spear, who's been working on our budget workshop discussion number 3.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, everybody. Just bear with me for a second. I'll jump into budget presentation here. I think. Oh, first time. All right, so can everybody see where it says Center St. Andrews budget presentation, October 18th, 2021? Yeah. All right, so thank you, Council, for going through this with me. And for those that may be watching, just my thanks to Council. We got together on a Saturday morning a couple of weeks ago and barreled through a lot of this in order to try to alleviate the number of nights we had to get together. And I think we made a lot of progress that night. So since version 2 that was given that Saturday, here's some of the changes. The assessment base was finally finalized by the province of New Brunswick and Service New Brunswick. We'd originally estimated at 5%, but it actually rose to over $370 million, which is an 11, I think it was 0.3% increase year over year. That's significant. That's probably the highest that I've seen for the town in my years here. And having a quick browse of all the municipalities across the province, we are certainly in the top tier for all municipalities. So at $1.26 tax rate, so that's the current year's tax rate, it'd actually be almost $500,000 in extra revenue. That's significant. And that's probably the biggest change, but there's some other changes we'll make note of. Within general government revenue, the LSD fire share increased to almost $140,000. We had originally budgeted at $135,000, but the final calculation came in. The tax revenue between the 5% and the 11% increased by $267,000. And the equalization grant decreased by $5,000 to $58,500. So last year's around $64,000 that we got on the equalized portion. We'll talk about that in a bit, why. So under general government expenses, you'll note that the Regional Service Commission fee increased from $11,000 to pretty near $60,000. Now, the reason for this is there's a new recreation cost share model with the LSDs, and they're going to be returning back to the town both our portion and the local service district portion of $109,000. So basically, we're giving them an extra 40 and getting 109 back. So that's significant and a good news story. But the only thing is, it is subject to RSC board approval. So I think they still get it next week, maybe, or maybe this Thursday, the RSC board's going to get together to approve that budget. So it's still on the table, but that's what's planned. And it's been in discussions for a couple of years now. So well, it could fall off the board, but if it does fall off the board, our portion will go down as well as the LSD. Now, in general capital, oh, I should have said council too. If there's any questions, just interrupt me partway through, and I'll try to give a chance after each slide. So as you know, we had a vehicle in for town hall to be able to do daily inspections, go to construction sites and things like that. And council requested that we look at electric vehicle. After looking at our eligibility and stuff, we've had to bump it up by $10,000. That's even with the rebates that apply. We've gotten quotes from one person at this point, just because we weren't going to tender or anything. But we just think if you're going to go with electric, that's going to have to be the way we go with it. We removed additional parking at the corner of, I think it was Par and King, what we were calling the Catholic Church parking lot for $13,500. That we're going to wait till we went through the mass or the vehicular bylaw and have a larger discussion on that. We moved the paint machine ahead 1 year. We're going to do some paving of the walking trails at Langmaid Park only, and we moved those ahead a year. And then staff had originally put in an office for the recreation director. We thought we had to rebuild a space at the arena, but for now it's been eliminated off this budget in the value of $16,000. And so with the extra revenue and less project, debt was reduced by about $395,000. But again, primarily due to the increase in the tax assessment. Now, mill rates. I guess before I jump into general discussion, council, is there anything on the general portion of the budget right now? We've gone into it so depth. I'm just kind of touching on the highlight points right now. Hearing none, I'll continue.
Mr. Spear, sorry, Mr. Spear. I don't know if you can see me or not there. I didn't know.
Yeah, I can.
Okay, you can. Okay. Just on the, just 1 second here, as you were going through. On the recreation, the changes to the recreation allocation, I guess, or the new model, recreation model under the LSD, you said we're increasing to 59K, but we're getting 109K back. Is that, I wasn't clear if that was, if the net then is about, I guess it's about 60 or 40, or is it, are we getting back about 60K then? Is that essentially that we're positive 60K, or are we actually positive 109K? I just wasn't clear when you were talking.
Positive about 49.
49.50, yeah, okay, yeah, just the difference, whatever it was. Okay,
Yeah.
that's all I wanted to be clear.
Yeah. So one of the problems, or not problems, council, but one of the challenges that council may want to look at is the cost of what these mill rates are doing, with the assessment, I mean. And so 11% in 1 year, year over year, is huge, that's for sure. I don't think it's a real surprise to anybody with what we've been seeing out in the marketplace, but there's been steady increases for the town year after year. And even 2 or 3 years ago, and I can't remember the exact, I think we were 6 or 7%, we're one of the top municipalities for growth. The thing to understand too is we've only had one additional unit built this year, or one that all the growth is in the market value, not in construction or modifications maybe, but not in new houses being built. So with that said, assuming, okay, we'll get into this later, but personal residences only. If you had a $200,000 assessment in the current year, next year, based on the adjustment in tax rate, you're going to jump up to about $223,000 in assessment, which will increase your taxes to $287. There's not very many $200,000 homes in St. Andrews. But if your assessment's $300,000, it's going to jump up to about $334,000. So your tax bill is going to go up about $431. And again, all of these are 11% increases, but just to give you an idea in absolute dollars. $500,000 home, you're going to pay an extra $718. And a $600,000 home, you're going to pay about $862. The vast majority of homes in St. Andrews are between the $300,000 and $600,000 mark. And again, we're talking just about personal residences. But I think it's extremely important, and maybe council understands this, but unless you own investment property, you may not, that within the town, within any town within New Brunswick, we're not the only taxing authority. The province of New Brunswick takes a lot of taxes too out of these that aren't personal residents. So the following categories of taxpayers are billed by the government of New Brunswick as well. So commercial properties, on top of our $1.26, are paying over $3. So their tax rate is about $4.25 for stores and such. So non-residential owners, so this people with second homes in the area, seasonal residents, are paying about $1.12 extra. That's the residential tax credit. The rest of us are allowed. Rental properties, so rental properties, whether it's within your own house, we might have a second apartment in your place or something much larger, they pay an extra $1.19. And then even for municipalities, for the town of St. Andrews, we pay about $1.24 of assessment. And as the mayor sees, our tax bills are well over $100,000 every year. Emily did a quick comparison. Our own properties aren't going up 11%, but they are still going up well over 5%. So just to get an idea that it's spread. And so the issue is, due to complex rate structure, not all owners are treated equally as a council's adjust the mill rate. And so in the analysis I gave you over the weekend, I showed you that despite if the council just held the taxes, so a personal or a homeowner only paid the same rates this year as they did, or next year as they did this year. But then if it's a commercial property, they're still going to see an 8% increase. So it's vital for you to understand that no matter what we do, a lot of places are still going to see increases. And, you know, unless the government of New Brunswick surprises me and adjusts their own property tax rates down to assist because of these increases. But as of now, I haven't heard of any such thing. And for property taxes, they should be generally a good thing when you see growth. Oh, delete a slide. There we go. So increased property taxes are a good thing for the town of St. Andrews. I mean, we're still working through a lot of infrastructure refurbishments. I think we all can agree the roads in St. Andrews need some tender loving care. We're still not seeing a lot of potholes or complete deterioration. We're seeing a lot of spider cracking, and certainly if you go up like Edward Street, which is pretty much New Street from the water all the way up to Prince of Wales, you notice a big difference in that, say King Street, which is probably hasn't been paved for 20 years. Our buildings and facilities all could use some upgrades too, with the number one being the arena. The councils are always looking at new infrastructure, so sidewalks, downtown washrooms are two things that come to mind. We're also looking at new services. What are we going to do about housing? Economic development, is there potential there for us on that? Environmental initiatives, that is, in looking at greenhouse gas emissions, there's different ways we can invest in everything from solar panels to electric vehicles to just, there's a whole bunch of different things you could do. So that's why increased property taxes is typically a good thing. It reduces and also reduces the overall debt requirement. Therefore, just like a personal mortgage, if you can pay something for cash, you're reducing the overall cost to own that thing. But there's also a problem for residents with these big increases. It increases the cost of home ownership tremendously. So it can create a barrier for new entrants, but also for long-term property owners. You know, most of us know people who have lived here for 30, 40 plus years, probably haven't changed their house that much except for typical maintenance, but yet their property taxes have probably gone up fivefold, you know, since they originally bought it or better. And that can become very costly, especially for those ones that have been here 30, 40 years. It means they're in retirement stage and they barely get a cost of inflation increases to their income. There's also an impact on cost of doing business in St. Andrews. And I can't put my finger on exactly what effect that has. But if you're a small business owner and your tax rates continuously go up all the time, then the cost of owning that property is going to be continuously going up. The cost of providing rental spaces is going to be going up. And St. Andrews is kind of unique as a resort town that it attracts businesses to the downtown that they can't get the same type of traffic elsewhere. But for instance, we've talked about working with the Huntsman on that Knowledge Park. Well, that could be potential barrier, the high cost of property taxes. And there is a perception out there, both internally from residents and externally from people that are in other localities, that we are a high tax municipality, but the cost of living in St. Andrews is high. So as council, you've got to balance those two competing narratives. Now, there's a potential to decrease the tax rate. And believe me, as an accountant, as a treasurer, and on my 18th budget, it goes against absolutely everything I've ever taught. And we've certainly have been the benefactors of increases, but nothing like this. But as of September 30th, inflation next year, this year, by the end of this year, is still predicted to be at 2.2%. I know we've seen fuel go wildly high in food, and so it could change by the end of the year. But as of Stats Canada's, the Bank of Canada's forecast was 2.2%. General wage increases predicted 2.5% to 3% nationwide. And you got to remember, for the town, the mill rate is only one component of total tax revenue because it's the assessment base times the mill rate. Well, if the assessment rate base is going up dramatically, then there's room to adjust the mill rate. And in the past, and even in the earlier versions of the budget, we looked at year-over-year growth of about 5% to be able to achieve new services, continue our recapitalization program, and continued growth within the town. So forgetting the mill rate for a second, if the town of St. Andrews just looks at how much do we have to grow, or could we grow the mill rate or the total assessment? So total overall property taxes, forgetting individual properties, but our own revenue, what would it do to the new mill rate? And I mean, this is really just a math exercise. So let's say council felt real generous and decided they were just going to freeze property taxes on a total basis for everybody. Again, only the town share. Well, the property tax could drop by 12.5 cents to $1.13.5. If we increase it by 2%, it'll drop by about a dime to $1.16, 3% to $1.16.5. And again, if we just maintain the rate at $1.26, our overall warrant will increase by about 11%. So another way to say this is for homeowners who St. Andrews is their primary residence. Let's say that we said we only want them to pay 3% more in absolute dollars next year for property taxes. The new tax rate to achieve that would be 1.165. And council, I apologize, I didn't get this out to you, but I'll send this after this meeting to you so you can review it for your own. So utility rates.
Chris?
Yeah, I was about to say, yeah.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. So before we jump to utility rates, I think, wouldn't it make sense now to have the conversation on mill rate? Since it's kind of like apples and oranges, two different, yeah. I'd open the floor up to council, but I guess to start, since it's not a formal motion, everyone can provide input around this table. I think personally, and these are my own views, to expect the taxpayer of St. Andrews to weather that complete increase. It's aggressive. And I do want to note that this isn't just a one-off for St. Andrews. The assessment value has been consistently going up, and St. Andrews has been targeted as the highest growth, and there's good reasons for that. We see the property selling at much higher prices, so therefore the homes are in fact worth more, but there reaches a certain point where we're asking too much in additional taxes from the community, in my mind. I'll be completely honest, I supported on the previous council, the 5% growth rate. When you get into the financials of the town, we know that it's needed. To just say, hold everything steady like happened, 15 years ago, that's actually why asset management in the town's failing. Because they didn't up it and they didn't do the work underneath the roads, and now we're stuck with all these assets that are essentially past their amortization or useful life. So I'm not saying that we don't take an increase. I think we all would like to see that. I just think that there's some type of balance where we're able to grow revenue like we plan to in this budget document, but to bank that much money, although I would love to have it, I think we all would love to have it. I just think it's too hard too quickly. And I think that as a council, I would challenge us to actually consider lowering the mill rate. And I'd love to have conversations on what that looks like. I did math, not as good as Chris, but I did some math on my own, and kind of the rate that I kept coming back to is $1.21, because that gives us our 5% growth plus a little bit in reserves for these projects like the fire truck that we were talking about. And then the other thing too is if we're able to get to that, perhaps we'd be able to, and not to get too far ahead, but that's basically getting our growth a little bit ahead of where we plan to be. Perhaps that would allow us to hold the mill rate in place next year as well once we lower it, right? So in my mind, I was at $1.21 before seeing this great slide, and I appreciate Chris putting this together, but I wanted to get some of your input on where you thought that we should go with this overall. Councillor Heenan, go ahead. And I apologize, since it isn't share screen mode, I can't see everybody at once. So I did see Councillor Heenan though.
Your worship and council, I had done a calculation and I had used a mill rate of 1.20, which I felt was adequate of an increase. I mean, talk on the street is that we have to be financially responsible to the town. We are very responsible to the town, but we also have to ensure our residents are not under dire straits. And we have a lot that are on fixed incomes that will go up 2%. However, if we put up our taxes 11%, we're asking far too much in too quick of a time frame. So when I did my calculations, I went through, I was close to you, your worship. I was at $1.20. And I feel that either of those scenarios are really basic. They allow us to increase our growth. They allow people to see that we are proactive. I had a conversation with Mr. Knopper on this, and as Mr. Spears said, this is definitely not heard of ever in any accounting scene, but I think it's necessary this time, your worship, that we do something. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Heenan. Any other member of council? Councillor Blanchard.
Yeah, thank you, your worship. I guess I would say I'd probably fall in line with both yourself and with Councillor Heenan. I was sort of around that 5% mark as well, because of, in terms of budgeting, that's what we had sort of talked about. So that would be 1.19. I could have easily support a 1.20 or a 1.21 as well, but I think definitely there needs to be a decrease, I think, to offset some of the costs that homeowners in the town and everybody in town, I suppose, will experience. So this is something that we have some control over. So if we can provide a little bit of relief, I think it's certainly worth doing.
Thank you. Councillor Hurdle, I saw your hand right after Councillor Blanchard's.
Yeah, I guess I don't have too much that's new to add. I just, obviously no one wants to pay more than they should, especially as Councillor Heenan noted, we do have a lot of individuals and families on fixed income in the community. So we have to be very cautious. On the other side, we also do have, significant capital expenditures that are coming up in the near future that we've discussed as well. So we have to be careful that, whatever we do today, we're not trying or struggling to undo in 4 or 5 years' time. But I think that it is fair around the $1.20, $1.21 mark is a good balance and a fair balance of both.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Akaji.
As I can get off on mute. Thank you, your worship. I agree with the other councillors that 11% is way out there. And I really think that I was looking at the 5%, the 119, but I would go along with the 120 or the 121. As you stated, we have a lot of people on fixed incomes, and this might just send them away, like they may go elsewhere because they can't afford to live here anymore. So I'd hate to see that, and I'd like to see us be able to do some of the things that we have, talked about before. And yes, we may have to adjust it later on, but hopefully this would give us a chance for now and help out our constituents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Neil.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, the only thing I'd add to this, I guess, again, I would be supportive in that area of the $1.20. Mainly for the reason, again, that it keeps our debt servicing ratio fairly low. Again, as Councillor Hurdle mentioned, with the capital projects coming up, we don't want that to get out of hand. And again, we'd be trying to undo it for years. So I think in that area of $1.20, again, we're keeping that ratio down between 5, 6, 7%, which I think is manageable for us. Thank you.
I agree. So good comments, Council. So we'll circle back to this. And the reason I'm going to circle back to this is we're going to switch to utility. And I know they're two separate funds, but if you're going to be overly aggressive more than we think on one, it might change your views on what you do on the other. So we got to feel that council is looking to reduce the mill rate, which is good. I think we've got overall consensus, but before we all lock in for we'll call it draft 4, let's just see what we're thinking for the utility rate, and then we'll circle back and say, is it $1.20? Is it $1.21? Does that work for you, Mr. Spear?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Your Worship.
Okay. So this, yeah, we can jump over.
Sorry, yeah. And but it's a little slow. So, Council, for the utility, it's pretty straightforward. The rates are really dependent on how much recapitalization we do. Simply put, that the day-to-day costs are basically the same. It maintains the same volume of water, year after year. The power's about the same. I mean, we'd have to drop by 50% before you'd see big changes in some of our costs. So really, when you're talking about the utility and changes in rates, it's for recapitalization or expansion. So in the current budget, version 3, we'll call it, there's roughly about 1 million to 1.3 for recapitalization. It was a little higher in the first 2 years because we have the subdivision or expansion we're talking about for new housing. But for replacing what's already in the ground, we've been working about 1 to 1.3 million. Currently, the asset is primarily based on suggested useful life. Terry keeps records of how often they have to respond to breaks. He also does videotaping, I think, of sewer mains throughout the year to determine what type of shape they're in. We can tell by water pressures and various things to kind of prioritize what assets should be replaced sooner than others. But looking at the asset management, right now, there's pretty near $6 million in backlog projects that could be completed. So these are things that might have had a useful life that an engineer said of 30 years. Now we're near 40, for instance. And it's all over the place. There's some stuff that's 10 to 15 years past due, and others that's only a handful of years past due. But it's important to understand the water's safe. It just means the risk of failure to certain portions of town is higher. This isn't catastrophic portions where something will break and everybody be without water. And it still means people are getting safe, reliable water to their homes. But it does mean there's some places in town where you could have a break in January and a block or two could be without water for days as you're trying to repair a line. Something else as we're talking about this is to understand that high volume users had a significant rate increase in 2018. The previous council made a bold move, and it was a good move, but it doubled and increased some of theirs by even more than that. So just to understand that a portion of the users, and there's about 50 of the 960 users that would have seen a huge increase like that. So council, I did a spreadsheet, but it was horrifically complicated. So it took me 3 days to get it down to where it could be presentable. And I'll give it to you with your council packages later this week to understand. But I'll give you the quick version here. So if we were going to borrow $1 million for the town for utility upgrades, it cost about $84,000 in extra payments a year. otherwise extra revenue we need to increase. If we jump it up to 3 million, it's about $251,000 a year extra. And if we did the 5 million, it's $418,000. So to put this in perspective, if we did all that's requested of us at the backlog next year, we'd have to basically increase our water rates by 50% in order to do that. So it's really unsustainable to the work in 1 year. So I'm just going to go through 3 scenarios here. So we're going to talk about the extra, the 5.8 million. And again, these aren't suggestions. These are just so you understand what could happen. So with all of these, the 5.8 is already on top of what's the $1 million that we talked about earlier, the 1 to 1.3. So currently a residential user fee is paying about $580. In order to do the 5.8 million next year, we basically have to increase by 35%, 7% thereafter, 6% the year thereafter. And so a personal water bill will go from $580, as you see there, up to $927 in 5 years. So that's about a 55% increase, which is substantial. You see fiscal services goes from 261,000 to 1.1 million, which is huge. And it goes from a debt servicing ratio of 18% predicted this year, which is fantastic, up to as high as 70%. Now, not interesting, but talking to the province, and they said, hey, if you guys need the work, you're refurbishing, and you can maintain user fees that people will pay them. We have no trouble with that debt servicing ratio going up. We understand you're a high capital institution, and that's, everything from NB Power to the telephone company, all the same thing. It's the cost of the infrastructure that is costly, not so much the day-to-day and the employees to run it. So if we did effects of extra capital at rates, so 5.8 and spread it over 5 years, it's basically the same thing. We're just dragging out the problem. And so you'll see that the rate still goes up to $854 by 2026. That's year-over-year rate increases of 10%. And remembering that the 10% is on top of the prior year's 10%, you're actually talking about a 55 to 60% overall between 2022 and 2027. That's compound. And the debt servicing ratio goes from 18% up to 65%. So something that seemed a little more reasonable and for discussion is the effects is to do the 5.8 million over 10 years. Now, to a certain point, that's probably not realistic because that 5.8 probably be closer to 7 just because of inflation. But for the sake of our discussion, it'll work. So the increases of about 5% year over year between 2022 to 2026 would maintain that, and that we'd kind of catch up to our backlog. And the fiscal services would go from 261,000 up to 745,000. And the debt service ratio is a more manageable 60%. Oh, we can have that discussion after. So council, I guess my recommendation is somewhere in between, is that I don't know if you necessarily want to take a huge step this year, but staff is talking about that we've got to find partnerships with granting agencies that are going to participate with us in this, not pay up to 50 to 60%. Right now, we have the Wharf project and the Trails project, which is taking up a lot of our funding opportunities. But I think what the council has to be ready to do is to do a 5 or 6% increase for next year. That allow us to do an extra block or so. But at the same time, staff works like heck to try to get some extra funding for 2023. And then hopefully that 5% increase will then enable us to do maybe triple the work, or that will go for something like a revenue increase so that we could do $3 million of work in 1 year, but we'd only be responsible for paying as low as $1 million of it, for instance. And so this one is kind of a personal preference. I just, with everything else that's going on, I'm not sure if we want to talk about a 40 or 50% increase in the tax, or in the water rate going into next year. I think anything we can do from 5 to 10% or better will substantially help, and we can do extra plans and continue on with much needed work. But at the same time, we don't want to be too aggressive until staff can work to see if we can get some federal granting that allow us, to basically have 3 for $1.
Is that it for this, Mr. Spear, for utility for now?
Yeah.
Okay. So this one's a more complicated one to me. I don't like the way in which the fund, I don't know about you, I don't like the debt ratio at all. I'm not saying the work doesn't need to be done. I'm not saying that we roll the dice on infrastructure failing, but none of those options presented to me look like anything I was comfortable with, to be completely honest with you. I know we have to make a tough decision, but I didn't like any of the above. I would say that I agree with Mr. Spear that we spreading it out definitely makes more sense, but I also think it needs to be adjusted. And the simple fact is, in my first year on council, we applied. We were kind of talking about which project that we wanted to go through the federal government for a program they had, and we were debating if we should apply for which one out of the 3. And we said, let's do all 3, and we got funded for all 3, where we had a partner come on. I think that it should be that we pursue every opportunity. I actually think at the next UMNB meeting, the zone meeting, that I talk to the other mayors and councilors and see if they are facing very similar situations. I assume they are. Mr. Spear, you might know, but I think it might be time to actually set up a regional meeting with all of the CAOs and treasurers, and together submit to the provincial government and federal government that we're in trouble. Because quite frankly, those numbers indicate that we're in trouble. Like no, 5-10% increases, even the 10% increase, like that's not even surprises. Like we're heading down a really bad path on the utility. We have been for a while, but it's becoming abundantly clear that this council might be the one that has to address it. So I'm not providing a whole lot of insight other than I know that the utility fund, not to say we don't need the extra revenue in the operating, but I'd rather be more aggressive on the utility fund and be more forgiving on the operating, because the debt ratio is just, it can't get to where we're projecting it to get to. So I'll pass it, open up the floor to other members of council to see what some of the thoughts are. Yeah, those are tough numbers to swallow. And I think this council is going to have to address this issue. Councillor Hurdle.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess the only part of what Mr. Spear mentioned that makes me a little bit nervous would be, hedging our bets this year in the hope that we can kind of find money next year. Not to discount or Mr. Spear's efforts at all of creating money out of nothing, because I've seen it happen firsthand. But that would be the piece that I would be worried about. My question, I guess, to have this out in the open would be, how difficult is it to transfer surplus from one fund to another, or is it possible? So in the essence, we're talking on one hand about having a surplus in the tax rate fund. Is that movable in case of an emergency?
It unfortunately is not.
Right.
They're 2 separate funds, and Mr. Spear, correct me if I'm wrong. There's a little bit of transfer allowed for like fire protection and things like that, but unfortunately they're 2 standalone funds, and the law protects them from that as well. Does it not, Mr. Spear, that we're not allowed to do that?
More or less. I mean, there's probably an upper limit of about $150,000 to $200,000 we can transfer. It's based on a fairly straightforward calculation we can do. But to be honest, as part of local government reform, I'd love to see them amend that. I understand their basic thinking in it, and it's a bigger discussion, but long story short, the value of a lot of this land is in the infrastructure that's being supplied to it. So an acre within the town of St. Andrews is worth more than an acre out in an LSD where they don't have water and sewer just because of water and sewer. But anyway, the long story short is we can't transfer $500,000 or anything, unfortunately.
Any other member of council? Councillor Heenan.
Your Worship and Council, just a point to ponder. We're talking about going to government and your worship, you're talking about trying to get a meeting with all the CEOs, et cetera, in all of the areas to see if they're facing the same issues. Well, we have to, as council, make a decision fairly soon for budgetary for next year. So I'm not looking to do a Band-Aid solution. I'm just proposing that perhaps we can come to a number that will get us through 2022 and be able to get our ducks in order, shall we say, before we predict anything further. I know we have a 5-year thing. I do know that, your worship, but I'm just thinking we're in dire straits right now. And we're at a crunch time where we need to make a decision to get us through at least 1 year. And I just think that that council's job right now, and that is a reasonable consideration for the people of the town as well. Because if we put a projection out there for 10 years and something falls through, then it's going to come back. But if we do an increase for a 1 year, let's say, and we have more ducks in order and we have more hooks in the water, let's say, we might be able to do it with much more stigma or punch. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you, your worship and council.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Heenan. So when we're talking about UMNB, there's no question about it. That's not going to help us for this year. This year, we're going to have to set it with what we know. This would be a long-term strategy where that 10 years doesn't look so scary, right? Like we're hopefully we can get, because any funding program to support us either provincially or federally, it's not coming between now and when we have to set the utility rate. So we're going to have to set the utility rate the way we know now. But I will say that I hate putting it down the road, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to fix it today. We just have to acknowledge that we have to make a significant step in rectifying it this year. So those are good points, Councillor Heenan. Councillor Blanchard.
Thank you, Worship. And I think my comments sort of fall along the same lines as the previous councillors. If I understand it correctly, Mr. Spear, so what you're suggesting is to deal with that $5 million or 5.8 whatever $1 million backlog it was. What you're showing to us there would have been taking out essentially the loan to cover that, to start that work, plus the additional 1 point whatever it was, just for the year-over-year maintenance that we had sort of already talked about, and then paying that off over, or servicing that debt over the 10-year period, I guess. To me, that was the most reasonable one of the options that were shown, and the only one I think that any of us could even maybe consider. I think the other ones were some significant increases, right? That's sort of how you're presenting that, correct?
More or less, just so you understand, the loans are amortized over 20 years.
Longer periods
So
of time.
that was just over the, the 10-year effect.
Right.
I guess council too, so there's that. And there's, if your worship, just if you don't mind, just to elaborate just a little bit on a couple of points.
Absolutely.
So one thing, worship, about and council taking too big of a high jump is, I think for our high end users, it'd be unfair to take something too high right away. So let's say we're going to do 25%. Well, for people that are paying between $50,000 and $100,000 for water bills, that's going to seem pretty steep with such short notice. So I think, that we're probably, this is the last year where it's going to be a smaller increase, we'll say, but we're going to have to sell the case of why it's needed and what it's going to be done. It also gives us an opportunity to chase other funding partners. Another thing that we're working as staff, and I just didn't get a chance to put a document together about getting back to meters for across the town. It's one thing that if we're going to increase these rates, people are going to say, well, why the heck are we on flat? And it's not fair that, me and a wife paying the same as somebody with 6 kids living in their home. So we agree with that. It's not easy, but it's not astronomically expensive either. I think it's already built into the budget, if I'm not mistaken. I just have to explain how it's going to work. It would actually likely be 2023 before we could actually completely go back there. We have to rebuild some of the infrastructure through next year. So the combination of those will give us a year to get our ducks in a row. Now, I'm not saying not to take some type of increase this year either, something reasonable like 3 to 5%. again, we could build up the reserves or keep the debt, keep the debt reduced in order to allow for more debt in the future. But I think we're just still got a little bit of homework to do and a little more selling point to surprise this on the community right now and anything that's too dramatic.
Thank you, Mr. Spear. Councilor Blanchard, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question there to follow up on. So, and I appreciate that, Mr. Spear. So I guess sort of my point is I do feel like we can't continue to put this off and we need to take action on it. It's a requirement. It's a necessity. It's been put off for a long time, and now it's sort of that time. We are going to have to deal with it. And I guess the reason I asked whether we needed to take out the full loan now, I guess, to do the work, where there may be an opportunity through the federal government, provincial government, to find some money, as Councillor Hurdle had said, the staff has been good at that before. There may be an opportunity there. So I just think even to take out a portion of what we think will be required now to get the work started, to do what we need to do, and then over the next year, 1 to 2 years, perhaps there's additional money that could be found, which would reduce the need for us to potentially take out that larger debt, take on that larger debt load. So I'm in favor of getting things moving now, taking out a portion of that debt, and then seeing what we can find, recognizing and making it very clear to the public that if we don't find that money, we are going to have to pay the piper, I guess, if you will, right? We are going to have to take that on as a town, and that could be difficult, and those would be difficult conversations over the next 2 to 3 years. But I, as you said, I think maybe even a 5% increase to get us going might be what's required at this point, or something along those lines. So that's just sort of what I was thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Spear, related but not related, just because we're trying to figure out it's a total package when it comes, these are bills people are paying. The difference on 1 cent on the mill rate's about $30,000 roughly, right? For the average owner of a home in St. Andrews, how much does 1 cent on the mill rate save them?
How much is the average home worth is the first question, but
Yeah.
but we'll go to $300,000 home. Well, people.
You might as well call it. You might as well be honest, but it's 375 in this town now. I bet you. I bet you the average home is way above 300 in this community now.
$40, we'll call it.
$40.
$37.50, but yeah, for 1 cent.
I'm throwing an idea out to council, just because we do have to make decisions. We are back between $1.20 and $1.21. I'm proposing $1.20. So we just heard how much that saves us. And what I'm proposing is we look to change for residential user rate for water. Right now we're at $5.80. I'm actually saying that we take it to $634.78, which is the average of municipalities in New Brunswick. That's a significant and aggressive, but we're substantially lowering the mill rate. Probably, I'm making an assumption, probably more than any other municipality is going to probably do in New Brunswick. I could be wrong, but it's definitely going to be up there, because we have to do something big to start doing some change. And then I do know that a lot of the commercial users that have the larger pipe, they almost doubled them in 2018. To hit them with that increase, I don't think would be warranted. But hit them with a 3 or 4% increase. And then for this one, we just get it. And then that's almost our benchmark moving forward. So as more municipalities have to up their water rate, that's our benchmark as well. So we're always looking at St. Andrews being the average of the province is what we're going to try to make our new goal. So I just want to throw that out to council as a potential balance between them all. Thoughts? Councillor Heenan.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. Your Worship, I appreciate that insight. I would be willing to support such a motion if we were to put it up that we were going to do the $1.20 millwright, and I believe you mentioned like $634 for the water bill. I see no problem in that. I'm sure people are aware that we are in trouble, but we're also giving them a tax break on the mill rate. And as we stated, and Mr. Spear and Mr. Knopper said, it's unheard of. So I think we're trying our darndest for the people of St. Andrews to make it fair. So if that was to come as a motion, you would have my support, your worship. Thank you.
Any other member of council? Anyone contrary minded, I guess, would be another thing.
Your worship, just for clarity from staff's perspective. So there's really to understand that because especially we're at a flat fee, that 580 is kind of equally across all households. So, and that's fine that we increase, say, the flat fee to that. But what about high volume users? Are they on a percentage basis? Are they going to see that type of increase too, or no?
I would say no. We just doubled them in 2018 to hit them with that high. It's a bigger number for them. It's not just $50. You're talking thousands. But I love the revenue, yes, but I just don't think we can hit them that hard that quickly after 2018. I would say that you look at maybe a 3% or 4% increase for them, probably 3%, because again, they doubled. I think that that's a marginal thing that as a business sets their budget, you can eat a 3% with your operation, but a 10% on top of being doubled in 2018 is just that's too hard, too fast. It's a lot bigger number for them than it is for residential users. Again, this is just my opinion. All members of council, obviously the floor is open. Okay, so we need to get
You've got them in shock and awe, apparently, your worship.
Yeah, we've I'm just trying to think how the best way. I'm speechless for once. I'm trying to think the best way to go. I think we felt pretty good about the mill rate. I think we're having a hard time figuring out how to proceed with this one. Councilor Hurdle.
Well, I guess I just speak up just to throw my support behind, what you suggested. I do think that we do need to make a significant step forward with this. I think the writing is on the wall. It's really clear. In a sense, our hands are tied, and to balance it that way, I think is a fair suggestion. So you have my support with that.
Deputy Mayor.
You have my support too. I think we have to bite the bullet, which is unfortunate. We have to carry the burden of what has happened previously. So, but I think we are being aggressive, but understanding, with lowering the mill rate and raising the water rate. So we've got to do something, that's for sure. And I will support you on this.
Thanks. So what is that, Chris? That's like a 9% increase, right? 9.3 roughly. I don't want your job, by the way.
You're on mute, Mr. Spear.
Sorry, what was the proposed rate, your worship, that you had thrown out?
634.78 in your report on page 8 of 34. It shows the town average.
Yeah.
Being at that, so I just thought we would align our community to the average of communities across New Brunswick.
Yeah, so you're right. That's about 9% times about 900 users. Whoop, 54 times 900. $45,000 to $50,000 in extra revenue for the utility.
And then we're handing back 30,000, going from $1.21 to $1.20 when we were talking about those two numbers to help absorb that a little bit.
A little bit, your worship, but please understand. So I can't be accused of misleading you, is that people are still going to see an increase in their tax rates. You're lowering the tax rate on an increase of 11%. So people's tax bills are going up. I think council's making a good decision, but people are going to say, I'm still paying more for taxes and still paying more for, it's needed. I think it's a good decision, but just so you understand that people aren't going to probably be smiling and buy Christmas gifts over the decisions.
Oh, I don't think at Joey's people are going to be hugging me when I go in. That's for sure. That's why we make the big money ourselves, right?
Yeah. No, we appreciate it, your worship. Though it's really good decisions to make for the betterment of the community, and I hope people appreciate that. I guess the one other point of clarity, what would be helpful to us, with $45,000 to $50,000 in extra revenue the town could do $300,000 or $400,000 in capital next year. That's about the equivalent of that much of a bank loan or a debenture. So the question is, do you want it to be used just to keep our projected debt lower, or can we increase capital to maintain a projected debt load as what it is in the earlier version of the budget?
I'm almost trusting your judgment better on that one, to be completely honest, because Terry's on as well. Like what makes the most sense from the town's perspective?
Well, again, you want to play catch up, your worship. I mean, that's the whole idea behind it. And so every year you wait, everything's getting a little more expensive. So we could, I'm going to look for a nod from Terry, but if we did $300,000 to $400,000, I think we could redo a block somewhere, correct, Terry? Yeah. So, I mean, that's significant. And honestly, I think we've got enough ahead of us that before our next budget meeting, we can identify it for you, that we know, what was kind of put off till next year, for instance, that we'd move back a year. So we'll make those suggestions in the budget, bring it to your attention. And if you don't follow it, that's fine too. But I just wanted some more clarity that, the more we do up front, the cheaper it is, to be honest.
Sounds good. I guess I'm going to look for just to make sure I have consensus on this. I know a few of us spoke, but I just want to make sure that we're acting as a team on this. So what I'm proposing is that we reduce the mill rate from $1.26 to $1.20, and then we adjust the flat rate billing of the utilities from $5.80 to $634.78 for residential, and then commercial users would see a 3% increase. That's what I'm proposing to try to deal with these challenges, to help homeowners with their tax bill, but also acknowledge the fact that we can't pretend nothing is happening with our utility rate. So I was wondering, by a show of hands, if you support that, and then if you don't, then we can talk about other solutions. A show of hands. All right, and we're all in it together. It's not just me. That's the direction we would like for draft number 4 of the budget.
Thank you. I'm just going to share real quickly here again. So it's really council what, oops, you want to see that? You already see that. Oh, closed on me. Well, it wasn't anything important. I guess it's just next steps, your worship and council. So we're tentatively discussing whether you want another budget discussion meeting this week, but I guess we don't need it. Sounds like the decisions have been made. No, next week, sorry, the 27th. So there's really 2 ways we could go at this, and I just need your opinion. It sounds like we're really, really close, but we should have a public presentation, and it's probably better to do the public presentation a few days before we finalize the budget. So with what you've given us tonight, we could probably a week from Wednesday have a quick Zoom meeting, do a public presentation for the public to talk about what we've discussed about and some of the key points, and then finalize it at the meeting on November the 1st. And then as an aside, we also need to work through the BIA bylaw. The clerk and I were going through that today. So I guess that's the question at this point. Do you feel comfortable in maybe getting together next Wednesday via Zoom just to go over a public presentation on the budget, or would you like to wait till before the 1st? To go back, Mr. Knopper, Paul, on November the 1st, do we have time at 6:30 to do a public meeting presentation, or have already got like those objections or something?
1 second. Through your worship, the only meeting we have on the 1st is the regular council meeting, so there is an opportunity at 6:30 to do a special meeting before the regular meeting of council if you wish. That's an alternative.
So I guess to go back to your comment, Mr. Spear, I absolutely think we should do a presentation on the budget. It's a good best practice. Unfortunately, it's usually not that well attended, but it
I
still
know.
gives, it still gives people the opportunity to find out more about where council's heading, and also an opportunity for council. I know all these meetings are done publicly, but it gives a more formal process where people can say councils, they've kind of got an idea what they're doing. I want to go see what they're thinking. So I think that we should definitely do that so council could get any feedback or questions they have prior to making the final decision. Was there any, I'm just trying to think of the previous meetings. I know that we did a great job getting consensus. Was there any decisions though that you're waiting on, or it looks like from everything I can see in the budget, we've kind of decided. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, I think so, your worship, that council seemed to be pretty okay. I guess just to go over the two or three big things is that we went through the capital budget really slow and precise. I think we're okay with that. That for what was put before staff was that the purchase of the ladder truck was the big item, was going to be delayed until 2023. But the process to purchase it would actually start early next year because it would take a year delivery. Within this, we've added a staff member in the seasonal. So Parks and Rec, we're just finding we're a little undermanned with all the additional responsibilities we have. We had disclosed that, but just to make sure council's okay with that we're going back to a 6 to 7 month term. And the final is within the budget right now is the rec director position that is built in and actually about 75% funded, including money from the LSDs. But that'll be coming to council about a job description in the next few weeks, and hopefully we start to get the advertising out sometime mid-November for that position. So those are kind of the really big highlights of things that are coming forward. For if you have any concerns about the direction in HR or anything else, let me know.
The only thing that makes me think of is obviously we have the double vaccination records that are required to enter the WC O'Neill Arena. And I note that 2 arenas in our area are already open. They're handling it completely differently. St. Stephen has a paid staff member at the door that checks it. And then Blacks Harbor's got basically the user group doing it. And I can tell you that from just coming in and out of the arenas already, St. Stephen's job, no disrespect to Blacks Harbor, but it's a lot more thorough. You've always got someone there. They're always coming and going. So I don't know if that's something that will mitigate some responsibility from staff, because I still feel like our user plan at the WC O'Neill Arena complex is, I find like it's still pretty tough. You know what I mean? Like I find that the two guests per person coming, I find that those very restrictive. The 15 minutes, again, I know there's cleaning, but I'm wondering if there isn't a way with this budget to actually just acknowledge the fact that for year one, we talked about conflict resolution. Councillor Hurdle brought it up, to have someone that's actually paid versus a volunteer at the door for year one. That might make sense to me. And I don't know if other councillors feel the same way, because I can just see it between the 2 arenas now that St. Stephen, again, nothing against Blacks Harbor, but because it's somebody there that's paid, it's going a lot smoother from an entry standpoint. And to be honest, it's a lot more thorough. I don't know if any other councillors have thought about that, because it's, and again, I know staff did a great job. It's a huge document, a lot of time. I just feel like our arena is going to be a little bit tough on staff this year if we don't do something. And again, Mr. Spear, you could, if you disagree with that, I feel bad for John and Bill to have to deal with all this, I guess is where I'm going.
Well, remembering that they're kind of short staffed last year anyway, because of the retirement of Mr. Sharkey, they said it was the worst year they ever put in because there was a lot of conflict over all the rules. So that's primarily why we put it over to the user groups to police it. There's also the issue of it was a lot of running back and forth to do the disinfecting, cleaning the ice and all that stuff. And it wasn't very efficient for them to police at the door and stuff. Certainly they would welcome having someone there. We may hire a security guard or something, to be honest. I don't know if we'd have enough work to hire someone full time through the winter, but we can discuss that internally and fit it into our budget.
And I'll weigh into council here, but is there an opportunity, we hire the commissioner in the summer, is there an opportunity for like a part-time year-round job type thing where someone does this in the winter, and then instead of paying the commissioner those high fees that they might be able to be bylaw support? I just, I'm just wondering if there's a way to kind of manipulate the budget for kind of a year-round position that that might work. I just question with people coming in and going out of the Heather Curling Club and people going and going to the WC O'Neill Arena. That's a lot of bodies and a lot of people saying, well, you're on the curling club, you're not my challenge. I'm here for the arena, right? So I just think by having someone there, if I was Bill and John, it would make my year so much more enjoyable. And again, the conflict resolution, Councillor Hurdle, someone that we could train to deal with this. And to be honest, someone who's trained at looking at the records versus trusting volunteers to do it properly. Some user groups probably, but to think that everybody's going to be really, yeah, you're good to go, thank you. You know what I mean? Like I just think that this might be a smart investment for us for year one of this process. I'll open up to council to find their thoughts on all that. Councillor Hurdle won this one, Councillor Enan, so I'll go to him first.
Oh, just a second before you. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I think this is a really, really good idea. I think this is about public safety and health, and we have to, be as serious as the situation requires on it. And I think it requires oversight, frankly. And this gives us an opportunity to have oversight and to be confident that we are keeping the community safe. Because like you say, when it's your friends and neighbors you're trying to police for things like this, it changes the dynamic. And it's so much easier to, I know this guy, I'm going to let him in, right? And if that constantly happens, then we're creating a gap in our defenses that can put our community at risk. And I think having someone there who's trained and able to have those conversations with people and be consistent with it is going to keep us safe.
Councillor Heenan, thank you, Councillor Hurdle.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. I just wanted to also add to Councillor Hurtle's comments that we also put ourselves in a liability issue as well if we're letting people in because they happen to be our friends or whatever. And I believe that if it's a paid position, then it becomes part of a lot better policing instead of just someone haphazardly doing it. And I just believe that this is with us for this year, and I think we have to bite the bullet and do it. Thank you.
Any other member, Deputy Mayor Akaji?
I agree with the other, with Councillor Heenan and Councillor Hurdle. It should be a paid position. I've seen it both ways, and I've also seen where someone went, oh yeah, I know who you are, go ahead. That's not fair to the other people who have to pull out their ID and show it. I think if you have an unbiased person who's being paid, they're going to ask the same questions every time. They're going to check to make sure. And yes, it is liability, but it is safety on our part to protect our people and our building. We don't want it closed down for any length of time because we didn't do the due diligence that we needed to do. So I concur with them, and thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any other member of council? Councillor Neal.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I would agree as well. Again, like you mentioned early on, what I'm seeing already in some of the arenas surrounding us that do have a paid staff member at the door definitely seems to be beneficial in my opinion. They're there the whole time. We don't have to worry about the doors being locked, that you're only coming in for that 15-minute time window, which again, we had to experience last year, and I'm sure some people didn't like it, but that's where we were as a province last year. At the moment, we are still in a green phase of recovery. So, having that, and the other thing I would add to that again is last year we didn't have the curling club operating. So this year we will. They don't necessarily have 6 p.m. curling games, bonspiels, whatever they're called. So there's more opportunity there, I see, for them to be coming and going. And I can see this being really restrictive and very difficult on our current arena staff if they're trying to police that door. Again, having somebody paid there, I think puts the onus on them. They're able to apply that policy, the rules equally and fairly to everybody that's coming and going from our arena.
And a question for council on this, is this an opportunity to, we talk about, better utilizing the arena? We're the only ones that had free public skating. Since someone's at the door, is there an opportunity for that individual to still collect the tuning? I go to St. Stephen, I pay, I think it's $275. I don't mind paying $275 a person to go skating. Those lights cost money. And that will, if you had 5 people come to public skating and pay $275, that significantly cuts back on the wage of that individual at the door. So I think it might be time to consider that. St. Stephen has youth with sticks or tykes. I don't know over insurance, Mr. Spear, but I went to it and there's 10 people out there to 15 people that pay $275 each to go do it for an hour. Like there might be some opportunities there where we could start charging for some of these ideas to offset this, some of the wages anyway. It's not going to pay the whole thing, but some of the wages of this individual being there. And I think people would understand. I guess I'll pass it back to Mr. Spear. Your thoughts on this? I know we're just throwing it at you, but it's better version draft 3 than draft 4, I guess.
Yeah, no, council. No, I think it's a good idea. We're gonna take it back to staff. I mean, St. Stephen's a little bit of a different venue because they are busy a lot more of the time and a lot more facilities. So I think it's good. We just got to look at our schedule to see what it is. It might be again back to, instead of a hired position, it might be better to go with a contract that can float with us as, say, because some Saturdays everything ends at noon, other Saturdays when there's a hockey tournament, it doesn't end till the night. So we'll go back and talk to Terry and see what he thinks would work, and then we'll price it out. And I'm assuming not only next year, but if we can get something arranged for like this mid-November, once, you know, the arena is going to start opening, hopefully November the 1st, that if we can get something lined up this year, council supports that, but we'll take it out of our surplus and adjust accordingly.
Okay. That makes sense. Anyone have any concerns over that? I see some thumbs up and head nods. So we'll look for that for the next draft then, and part of the presentation. You got to build that out. It's not as easy as just let's do it. You got to calculate the hours and the wage, all that. I get it. So, but I'm glad that council. Is there anything else from anyone at council, since we are getting close to that point? Is there anything that you felt like we've adjusted or any changes? I feel like, again, we've been pretty good at getting consensus and making decisions. It's actually been fairly impressive, to be completely honest with you, how quick consensus is done and how quick you're willing to make the decisions, even the tough ones.
Your worship, one thing I should bring up, I forgot to bring up, was in the economic development budget, we took $7,500 out of assistance grants and earmarked it directly to the environmental committee after their presentation a couple of weeks ago. And so we didn't add to the budget. We just, because the assistance grant itself doesn't look like it's going to get paid out in full this year. So are you okay with that, or would you like us to maintain the assistance grants at 25,000 and still add in the 7,500 for the environment committee?
I'll look for council's direction, but my assumption is because the Explore St. Andrews is giving out assistant grants now, it's less of tourism-based ones that the municipality will be giving out as a result. So I believe that's the real reason why we didn't spend it this year. You know, not the only factor, but probably a major one. So I think I'd rather run that budget tighter than add on. Does that make sense to everybody on council? You don't lose it, you don't use it, you lose it. That's classic government, right? So I guess we lost our own. So not to say that council doesn't have a habit of overspending on that in the past as well. So I am cognizant of that, Mr. Spear. So unless someone's got opposition, I'm fine doing that for the environmental committee. Perfect. We're all good there, Mr. Spear. Was there anything else, Mr. Spear, on that first line item for number 1, or does that wrap up budget conversation in the workshop for you?
There's actually one thing, your worship, that's a little bit related is we have an opportunity to pick up some basically different decorations, commercial grade decorations for the wharf, especially the lights that we've been buying in the past. We're basically replaced them year after year because of the salt. And we only had $3,000 set aside for all the lights. For about $6,000, we can get 14 snowflakes to go up and down the wharf. That should have a lot better lifespan than the LED lights we've been doing. So that go out of this year's current budget. We have plenty of surplus to cover it, but it isn't, it would put one of our line items over and above. Is council okay with increasing the Christmas lights budget in public works by an extra $7,000 essentially?
Yes, let Terry decorate.
Perfect. Yeah, and I bet you some of the activities that we're planning on doing unfortunately aren't looking very optimistic. So I think I can tell you one thing, last year with everything canceled, the lights in town, I can just talk to myself, they meant more. If you look at that, it probably pays for itself in 2 years anyway with the shorting out of lights. So it's probably not only the right thing to do that way, but it's probably a good financial decision as well versus replacing them every year or two.
Okay, thanks, your worship. Well,
Councilor Hurdle?
Do you have like an image of what they look like? Any chance that you have?
Terry's looking. He'll either send you an email tonight because he's got them all shopped out, or we'll send you a picture of them first thing tomorrow morning. How big are they, Terry? Do you remember? Like side to side?
They're 40 inches, Chris.
So 3.5
across,
feet.
40 inches across. Right now, the snowflakes that we have at the end of the wharf are about 42 inches. They're residential type snowflakes. So they're the ones that are on the post at the very end of the wharf. And the boys had a terrible time last year trying to keep those going. And you can't buy those anymore. We looked everywhere for them. So these are basically a replacement for those.
Well, as the 5-time champion of the best lights in St. Andrews, I'm going to trust your judgment on that one, Mr. Acton. Councillor Blanchard's coming hard at that this year, though. He's really upped his game.
Second place last year.
It's going to be hard to beat that with the first place one if they're still in town. Wow. Anyone else on that? I think we're good to call that almost a friendly amendment to the budget. How about that one?
Yeah, that's good. And just one other thing, your worship, we don't have to decide this tonight, but because within the TALV, the tourism accommodation levy, the town gets a portion of that. And after the calculations are said and done, it's going to be between $75,000 and $90,000 this year. That goes to council for some type of tourism projects next year. It'll be something over the winter, but just for council to be kind of aware that that extra money is sitting out there. It's just, it shows it in and out without really any destination in our budget. But it's just so you're aware that there's extra funding that could be used for other projects once we get going through the winter.
That's good. We'll set. I know you sit with them on their monthly meeting or whatever it is, but we should sit down with them and talk about that strategy. Is maybe we could take our dollars with their assistance and maybe make it a bit more. So let's align on what they think the priorities are. But that'll be an exercise. There's no question about it. We will find a way to spend it. All right. So that'll wrap up number 1, unless there's anything else, and we can at this point transition to number 2. I do note that 2 members of council did declare a conflict on this particular item, so we will give them a minute just to turn their cameras and volume or speakers off at this point, so we can get into this one.
So council, we've been approached by the St. Andrews Biological Station to create a special electrical connection for the Viola Davidson. Now, the Viola Davidson is that longer red Coast Guard vessel that I'm sure most of you have seen at the end of the wharf just about all summer. It's been berthed right at the very end. They are looking for our assistance, and all that is to give us permission. They'll give us the money. They want us to run the project to get the power connected, but they want us to actually run the project with their assistance. It would have to be quick. Now, I had diagrams in there for you within your council package. And if you look on page 19, it shows that overhead shot of the wharf. Now, for 3-phase power, it's a high-end electrical outlet that requires its own transformer, I guess. And what they're recommending, or what they were wondering, is if they talked about placing it basically beside the Jolly Breeze building. They'd make a building that's similar to the Day Adventure Center buildings, and then run the phase powered out to the wharf. There's a little container out. It would sit on the inside of the wharf, basically where the fishermen sit for the winter, and they'd be moved around. And so it's a $200,000 to $300,000 project, and we had some concerns because where they want to put the building for the transformers is actually at a straight end. And that is against a council policy that says they won't obstruct street ends. But the other problem we really have at the end of the day is that we're trying to rebuild this wharf of our own in the next year or two. And so they're going to give us $150,000 to $200,000 or whatever it is to rebuild this project, and then build this power, and then we may have to tear it up again in order to do our own work around there. And to make matters worse, even if they agreed to that and would reimburse us to reconnect it again, it's going to make it a more dangerous, costly, and time-consuming effort when we're removing all those utilities. As part of the Wharf project, we'll be ripping apart or taking down all of, like, the electrical that goes out to our own building, the water and sewer lines that go out there, and the internet that goes out there. So a big portion of the Wharf is going to be removed for a period of time. It just seems, well, I understand their concerns, and for them to take a step back, the biological station Wharf, I guess, was condemned earlier this year. And they can't use that anymore. So they've been moored at our wharf since, or berthed at our wharf since, parked up alongside there, which has worked out well for all parties. But however, they're saying their wharf could be 3 to 5 more years before it's rebuilt. And the problem is, if we don't give them access, they could lose the boat permanently. They're concerned because, again, it's on loan from the Canadian Coast Guard. Not sure where it could end up, but it certainly won't be out of the bay. And from what I understand, the biological station, it's just not a nicety to have because of the Coast Guard, but they actually actively use it for their research and things, that it's at their disposal. So in normal circumstances, I guess staff would be saying it's not worth it, but we need council's input on this one because of the impact it's going to have on the community to a certain extent. And again, I don't know how significantly it's used there. I just know they're very, very, very interested in doing it. Like, they've been pushing hard to have it work through. It's just not, if you can, that's okay. They've been working with us over the last month and a half, looking at different diagrams, different ways to try to address our concerns to make sure it happens.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Spear. I see some questions. I have some myself, but I saw Mr. Hurdle's hand first. So go ahead, Mr. Hurdle.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess, my point of view on this would be beyond the revenue. I actually think this ship is pretty iconic for our area too. And I do like to see it here in town, and obviously it does bring in revenue. My question is, have we discussed all the issues with them? And if we have, and we've said, what you're considering can't be built at the street end, we're going to be taking the wharf apart in a couple of years. These are all of our problems. Have we engaged them in a creative solution, and maybe instead of us trying to fix this, like, what would they suggest we do, since we can't put it where they're proposing and they really want to move ahead with it? What's a counter proposition they can come up with?
Well, I guess one thing, Councillor, is to remember that it's up to council to make the decisions. And so there is a policy in the street end, but if you'd like the thoughts of keeping the boat and keeping the building there, council can make that decision. They say they're very flexible as far as where the building goes. It's not necessary to put it there. There just isn't a lot of room elsewhere to put it. If you think about it, at the wharf, there's private property on the Day Adventure Center side. There's private property over, by the Canada Post building. And so that's about the only logical place that still resides in our property. If they go on the other side of the wharf, then they're going to be right in the middle of the construction zone. So not just wires, it'll be the whole building and things. And so I guess it's for council to let us know if that building's a problem, then we can go back to them and say, where would you like that put? Or where could you put that, and get them to work with other partners. But again, to reiterate, there could be a significant increase to the cost of our overall project because the extra work is required by the contractors in redoing our wharf. The other thing I made a note on but forgot to talk about was about snow clearing. So right now, where they want to put that building, Public Works moves the snow over there. All of King Street I think Water Street too, Terry, or just King? Anyway, the snow is removed and dumped over the side of the building with the blessings of DNR / DFO. It's clean snow. It's just right after the storm. It is just snow with a little bit of salt content, but no more than the salt water. And so there'd be tremendous extra cost if we had to start shipping that by dump trucks in other areas. And so that particular piece of property probably isn't the greatest. We'd have to tell them that that's not the location. We've also been using it for the past couple of 3 summers as storage for the fuel trucks that they used to sit on the wharf. And so if we took that away, they won't have anywhere for that. So, you know, I guess if council's okay with them at least still entertaining this, we tell them the location of the transformer that isn't good. If you can overcome that, then we're still interested. But understanding that there could be a period of months where it's down because of the construction, they still may be able to make it work, maybe. The one thing we brought up to them too is that, you know, during construction, there's likely not going to be any motor vehicle access onto the wharf. We're hoping to continue pedestrian access, and we're talking to engineers about that. But if they have to supply this vessel somehow, whether it's fuel or whether it's equipment, even they are starting to wonder how they're going to do that if they can't access it from our wharf. But again, that's something they'll have to figure out how to overcome, whether it's at Bayside or going to Lake Letite or somewhere other jurisdiction, at least, you know, once or twice a month in order to load up on what they need.
Okay, I have some questions, but I think I see Councillor Heenan's hand first before I ask mine.
Yes, your worship and council. I just had a text from someone who's watching us live stream and who has been an expert with marine, how would I put this, electrical. And his suggestion that submarine cable from the shore would divert all the problem from the wharf. So it's just something, I don't know if that would, if it can be a design thing that can be different, but it wouldn't interfere with like construction per se.
And actually, Wharfinger came up with that the last time they had to go back because they hadn't considered that. But
Yeah.
we said, what if instead of attaching it to the wharf, you put this power supply along the shore, buried or whatever?
Mhm.
They said, good idea. We have to go investigate that. So thank you. Thank your contact
Yes.
for that thing. And they are currently looking at that as we speak.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Spear. And the other thing is, I think council's first job is to say, do we really want to accommodate the boat? Like, do we really want to do the necessary work it entails to accommodate this? Do we want to be partners with this? Do we want the town to be recognized as helping the Coast Guard in them keeping the Coast Guard boat in this area? That's I think is the first thing before we ever get into how the design or how we're going to get the power out there. That's just my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Heenan. So I'll ask just a few now. So I guess my reaction originally to hearing this is if the town can do something to help the biological station, the town should do something to help the biological station. We're very fortunate to have that facility in the community. It's a major employer. They do some amazing work. And I'd like to think if we were in a situation that they would work with us to try to find. I think I know the answer to this, but just so all council's aware of. So to have this vessel there, none of our current users, whether it be commercial, tour boat operators, or even pleasure boaters, would be displaced as a result of this. Correct, Mr. Spear? There's room for
Correct.
all.
That was the instruction I gave to the Wharfingers to make sure that everyone who's currently there, they might be inconvenienced a little bit, but as will they.
So check the box there, right? Like that's the big thing. We want to support the biological station, check the box. It's not going to take away from anyone else using the wharf. It might be a minor inconvenience, but that happens. Everyone's got to work together. Everybody, this community is one community. Everybody in St. Andrews pays for that wharf. We need to all work together. So check the box there. So the issues to me come down to the location of the transformer and then what happens when we start the construction. So personally, the taxpayer of St. Andrews can't be paying, the small town can't be paying for a federal ship per se, to remove that wiring should they run it down. So if they know going into it that we're going to disconnect it and they're going to have to incur the cost for that, that will be part of their decision making. It's that simple to me. We can't expect St. Andrews to be funding a federal ship. We just can't. What it comes down to is the location of the transformer. Is there any reason there's spots in front of the Day Adventure Center? Those are on town land, correct, Mr. Spear? Would it be possible just to take those where we had those fuel trucks and make those reserved for the fuel trucks?
Well, except the businesses at the Day Adventure Center probably wouldn't be eager to have fuel trucks sitting in front of their doors, even if it's along the road, right? There's businesses all along the length of there.
Okay, so even though it's all like, I think all the fuel trucks are pretty much in that area, that there's some businesses that aren't doing that particular thing. You think they might have some concern over, but there must be a location close by temporarily that we could reserve for these individuals. How many spots is it? 3?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's 3 spots. And then this transformer at the end of the 5 years, it would be taken down. Is that correct?
No, they're willing to leave it up for the town of St. Andrews use. That would be minimal. We've never had a request in my time here. Some of the larger boats could use it, but we're recommending that it be stored or placed on the wharf. It's probably inaccessible by them. So, it's primarily for their use at this point in time.
So right now, what are they using for power, for this power? Like, how are they doing it right now?
Nothing, because they haven't overwintered here yet. It's primarily for the winter that they're concerned about.
And how much does it cost to move this transformer? Should we put it in a location and have to move it? What I'm wondering is, we have an upcoming conversation in regards to a building down there. Could it potentially be moved in behind that building to make the streetscape? Because if the building's staying there, it could go behind that building potentially. Just a solution here, just thinking outside the box.
The only problem, your worship, is they need to have this thing constructed for this winter. Like, they'd be more or less looking for me to get council's blessing tonight, and I work my butt off with them over the next few days to try to get things straightened out so they can get this thing put out to bid by the end of the month and built by the first couple of weeks of December.
So is there any chance that if we did put it at that particular location, when construction happens and we need to disassemble it, that we move it over to the other side out at that time? I have no idea how much. I assume it'd be a big bill to move these, but I don't know that for a fact.
Well, it'd make more sense just to leave it over on the other side where they proposed initially. Because there's no land where that building is you're talking about right now. It's sitting on stilts in the water.
Okay.
So you'd either have to put it in front of it or on the side of it, which happens to be a view or the boardwalk. So it's probably neither of those locations would be preferable.
I'm just trying to think. And so there's no other location that you guys have identified that this could possibly go?
We're looking, but none that we own, but we've encouraged them, and maybe we can talk to private landowners that have spaces around there too that might be willing to. They seem to have, I won't say an unlimited budget, but in order to make this work, they're not looking to save pennies. So if we can, if we had to stretch it an extra 20 meters for them to make it work, they seem to be okay with that. So like you said, we know that there's private landowners right around that entrance there that may be interested in helping us out, or at least working a deal with the Public Works Canada to allow it to happen.
Do you think that they would be, and I know I'm asking hypothetical, but do you think they'd be opposed for paying for the disconnection when we're doing the construction? Or do you think that that's the cost of doing business?
They wouldn't. I already know they wouldn't be, because I told them they'd have to, that council wouldn't consider it if we had to pick up an extra several $100,000 to reconnect it.
So therefore, them knowing that and still wanting to proceed, the real only issue that I can see is placing this transformer essentially. Like, because we're not incurring costs, we want to help them out. They're paying for it, so be it, right? It's out of their pocket. So I think the next step on this would be to discuss with private landowners, just to make sure council has all options on the table. There may not be any, but just in the close by area, if anyone wouldn't mind it, I know it sounds bad, but literally being in almost their backyard, right? Like, again, it might not be a solution, but There's no easy solution, but for the sake of the biological station being such an important part of our community, I think we owe it to them to explore all options to try to make something work for them. Any other member of council? Councillor Heenan was first this time.
My friend just once again texted me and is very interested in this and said, is there a room with the one that's by the post office? Is there additional space there for another transformer? Because his feeling is it's not very large. I don't know. But anyway, that was his question and I'm just passing it on.
Absolutely. So that would be part of the conversation with staff, with private landowners, as the town only has basically enough for one car right away on the right-hand side there currently. That would be owned by the post office. That'd be part of the conversation on what that could look like. So potentially. Councillor Hurdle, I saw your hand as well.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess I have two points. My first one is obviously they're making efforts to make this non-visually polluting, but with transformers, there's sometimes like an ambient noise or noise pollution that can come from it. Do we know, is there one around that we can kind of see? Does it emit noise?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I can't really say. I think that's one of the reasons. Now, the thing that they want to build is the size of a baby barn, so I'm assuming it would also be insulated, so to speak, to help with that. But you've got it. I have no idea. It's a really good question. I'll pose that to their engineers that they're asking us about this.
Thank you. And I guess my second point would be, at our core in St. Andrews, I believe that, part of us is a marine science town. And we have to be keeping that at the top of our mind too. What do we want to encourage in the future? And, if we're looking at a knowledge park as well as part of what we want to accomplish over the next, however long that takes, what kind of businesses are we attracting to the area? And perhaps having this could be a benefit to our community down the road, and especially would encourage the kind of science that's going on that we want to have happening here too.
Yeah, and again, Council, at the end of the day, from staff's perspective, it's more the fact that it's interfering with our own project is probably the hugest obstacle. If we weren't doing this project the same time they wanted this, we'd say, yeah, we'll make it work. But it's this that we'll be tripping over them to a certain extent is why it's the biggest struggle.
Right.
It is unfortunate in a community that has so few wharves that we're all renovating them and refurbishing them at the same time. Councillor Heenan, I saw your hand again. Was there something new to add?
Yes, Your Worship. Just by listening to council and Your Worship, I'm thinking that the decision is probably that we are supporting this to be done, that we want to make our neighbors happy and we want to be part of this. So we have the issue, if we agree to that, even if we get a consensus on that, then we have to work with these people, right? So I'm just thinking we have to really decide, and I think we have decided that we want them here. So now we gotta, I know nothing about construction, so I'm not going to sit here and say I do. But with the way things are in engineers, and especially at the federal level, I'm kind of thinking that there might be somebody who would know how this could work much easier than our staff trying to figure it out. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Heenan. Mr. Spear.
Yeah, just quickly, just to understand, Councillor Heenan, Public Works Canada has several engineers working on this. I met with about 6 of them. So, I could run an extension cord from Town Hall to the end of the wharf is about my capability. So there's lots of people looking at this. I guess one thing that may be an option too was early on in the process when they talked, they wanted to put this transformer at the end of the wharf, and I kind of discouraged it because I didn't think we wanted a building out there. But if we had the right looking building, maybe that makes more sense. But then it just be, if they could do an offshore wire, something that is small, like 8 by 8, kind of matches what our Wharfinger office looks like. Maybe that does make sense now. I didn't know if we'd want something like that out there, but if we want to work with it, maybe I go back to them and say that maybe we'd be better just to put something out there and not try to screw around at the approach where there just doesn't seem like it's going to work well.
I think that might be it. So we could go around, but I think what we're hearing is we want to find a way to make this work. Let's talk about end of Wharf. Let's talk about private landowners, and let's come back and talk about the final location. I think we all agree we want to help. We're not going to necessarily come up with the exact answer today. But I have no problem, Mr. Spear, on if we want to book a meeting with them, of sitting down with them as well and just seeing if they have any solutions as well. And again, the town approaching some of these private landowners versus the biological station in partnership approaching them, you might have a better outcome, because a lot of people do appreciate them being in the community. So more to come, but Deputy Mayor, if you want to add something, I saw your hand, so I don't want to overskip you, but the gist of this is we want to find a way to make this happen, but we're just not 100. I don't, like, for example, I don't think there's another location we can dump the snow. Is there, Mr. Spear?
No, that we'd have to leave that area pretty much open for the snow removal. So we'll probably take that off and just try to either get it on private landowners or build a nicer building out on the wharf that can be used.
All right. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Council. I think that if we can design a nice building or a nice whatever box you need or whatever at the end of the wharf, I think that would be the solution. And then it could be removed easier and put back on if necessary when we finish our wharf construction. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you,
And
Deputy
Council.
Mayor. All right, I think Mr. Spear, that's probably enough for direction for this. Is that correct? Just to keep this moving along. Perfect. So we're going to move at this point. We'll let Mr. Blanchard, Councillor Neal and Councillor Blanchard join back in, and we'll move to number 3, which is the TSA 2021, which is a request for proposal, the Champlain Avenue housing development. It's the scoring matrix. So again, I think it's you, Mr. Spear. Is it Mr. Knopper on this one?
Well, either of us, I guess. I forgot my scoring matrix back at my desk, so maybe if Paul wants to put it up on the screen and speak to it, or I can, and well, he's doing that. Long story short, councilors, we got 2 proposals for the first one that closed. And what we want to do is just make sure you're okay with the scoring metrics we gave you. If you are, we'll photocopy it and bring it to you, hand deliver it to your locations tomorrow, so you can start evaluating them. I guess it's whatever the mayor has suggested, that maybe all of council, because of the urgent nature of it and the importance of it, that it might be a full, instead of an ad hoc committee, it'd be better to have the whole. Then it's to let us know how much staff participation, if we each get 1 vote, or if we combine our votes, or each get like a quarter of a vote to make 1 vote or whatever. But how far you would like, well, no, but it's just whatever you'd like the staff's participation to be on this. We could grade it or not. It is a 2-part thing. One of them is the actual proposal. The second is the financial, which is part of these types of proposals. That's usually not put across the whole committee. It's just restricted to 2 or 3 people, just to evaluate the capabilities of the proponents to carry out their plans. And so that would be a smaller committee, usually the CAO and treasurer, which happens to be me. So probably Paul, I, and maybe a 3rd member of council, possibly Councillor Hurdle with his experience, would all we could work together to determine the capabilities, but that's up to council to decide that.
Sorry, Your Worship, can you see the scoring matrix?
I can, yes.
Okay, thank you. So
Did you want to talk on it, Paul?
yeah, sure. So council, going through it as the CAO Spear was mentioning, it is broken down into technical merits and as well as a financial section, financial merits. So each section was broken down into 2 different areas. So land use, and this was broken down into scores of 30. So it highlights the conceptual plans, which we gave a higher scoring rating to, the proposal, which clearly illustrates all phases and build outs, and density, as these are aspects that council was looking for within the RFP process. As you can still see, we still have adequate walking trails, gardens. So we're not leaving out any of the aesthetics, but definitely focusing more on the dimensions, the build, and the needs of the community. For the second part here, design building functionality, this was broken into a score of 45 and really touches more on our developments 1, 2, 3 bedroom units, has the building percentage, accessible units for future use. We also talk on the scoring. We did give development is energy efficient, did get a bit of a higher score, and the building's attractive. So we're touching on aspects that people would like, as well as building, air conditioning, heat pumps. There were sections for that. So we wanted to focus a little bit more on the accessibility, the types of dwelling units, and still have a touching of environmental protection within them. The other sections we were looking at were financial merit, which highlights the project team. So highlights the resources the team has, their abilities, their capabilities of handling these types of projects, and what their experiences are. And the second area was just the financials of the project itself, funding sources, budget, and just a breakdown of that. And that has a scoring of 10. So does council see or feel that there's any changes that they would want to make to this? Now, note we can change the scores around as considerations, but what is being shown as the scoring is what was representative of what was in the RFP. So that's what the RFP proponents have built their RFP proposals on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Knopper, for taking us through that. I guess I'll kick off is I'd like to see if there's any way that we can put a little bit more weight on what is the anticipated rental fees and purchase price for the units. That's one that I'd like to really bump up. And then personally, the buildings are sited with expansion in mind. I'm not as concerned to that. If a developer wanted to take the land and maximize it to its potential to make immediate impact, which we need in the community, I'm not as concerned about expansion in the future if they're maximizing the land today. Those are the only ones that I really jumped out at me in my notes. I don't know if any other member of council supports those or has any other ones on their own list that they had. Councillor Hurdle, I can see.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I would like to, further comment on, the rental fees and purchase price as well. I just wanted to ask for some clarity around that. Because I know we're talking about affordability and affordable housing. In my mind anyway, and maybe this is just for me, I'm not 100% clear on if this project is earmarked as affordable housing, or if it's not, or if we're kind of hoping that it is and we're not sure. And we just want to sort of rate it on that merit as well. And if it is affordable housing, then absolutely we should look at bumping that one up higher.
I guess the way the proposal was written was that affordable housing was used about 700 times throughout the written document without saying specifically how we're going to get there, just that emphasizing, as the mayor points out, that that was a key proponent. And so possibly the marking we have isn't very representative of that. There's different ways to go that, including partnering through like an agency like CHMC to do that. But certainly affordable was supposed to be something that was highly attractive because it's town's land, something we have to offer. So if someone's asking the taxpayers to give them an asset or to help contribute to it, then they better be willing to have some type of return back, which would be presumably the ability for the taxpayers or new individuals to move into town by finding units that they can afford.
Thank you very much. My second question, just everything here is very objective, and that's great. It allows it has to be very straightforward, except for one, which is the attractive design. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about that. How is that determined, and do we follow the other guidelines in terms of how things should look?
I guess the hope is that enough of you will agree that there will be, if they're fairly close, then, it's okay. I doubt we'll get someone come in with like a California design glass structure with, strobing lights versus a more traditional. I haven't seen but we haven't even opened them at the town hall yet. So we didn't, skew the results or look like we're doing anything. If we wanted to get this solved before we crank them open. But I guess it's the eye of the beholder, as long as everybody on council has one favorite over the other. It should be sufficient. I guess, again, with 7 people plus staff marking it, it'll probably be generalized as, or that all of us probably have a sense of what belongs to St. Andrews and what doesn't, I'm going to guess. There'll be some, when you're looking at it, maybe a little bit more stylish than the other, and Xander would be a heck of a lot better to talk about that than me, about what's acceptable, and maybe he wants to add in after, but the thing to remember about this particular project is it's basically surrounded on all sides. Don't forget that you've got Anchor's Landing and houses along Champlain, you got Mowat Drive and houses on the other side, neighbors. The only people that are going to see this project are council when they cut the ribbon, and the people that live there, that it really won't be something that's going to be seen by anybody else, I don't think. But Xander, did you want to touch on a little bit and how they could rate that?
Sure. I mean, yeah, it's design and aesthetics are always a subjective exercise. So I think Mr. Spear is kind of right that when you get enough people with knowledge of the town and what fits and what doesn't, that that would work. There is the secondary municipal plan and the design guidelines. So I think that tries to maybe rationalize some of those more subjective things. So that might be something worth looking at if you want. I mean, it's not going to give you a matrix exactly of how to do it, but it might point out some things about, the way that windows are aligned with other windows, and you might see that as being useful. And I think again, I would agree with Mr. Spear. It's you want something that fits generally in the town. It's not in the town plat, and it's really about the site plan. I think that's why that was so highly weighted, and the how it actually works together as a kind of a master plan community, because that's ultimately what I think this will end up being. So that's what I would offer. The only, I guess, kind of tangible thing there is take a look at the secondary plan and the design guidelines, because it might give some more direction than if you're looking for something.
That's great. Thank you.
Councilor Blanchard.
Thanks, Your Worship. And maybe following up on that, the attractive design thing rated at 10. I would actually, my recommendation, my suggestion, I guess, I don't know how council feels, but I'd actually like to see the energy efficiency upped just a little bit. And because of the subjectivity, because of what Mr. Spear had mentioned, where it is kind of sitting, the location where this actually is, where it isn't really visible necessarily from any of the streets, like people driving through. And also because maybe the subjectivity associated with the attractive design, I'd almost maybe suggest that maybe come down to an 8, and we bring up the development up to maybe a 7. So a drop in 1 of 2 and an increase in other for 2. That would maybe, because to me, energy efficiency is maybe more important in this situation than sort of the attractive design. And again, to outline, what's already been talked about, the subjectivity of that, I'd like to see a little more weight on the energy efficiency. So that's my only suggestion or proposal, I guess. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. And then I guess just to go back to kind of, I know I talked about the anticipated rental fees, but for example, does the respondent require any financial assistance from the town, being a 3? And then development has a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, being a 10. If someone was to completely fund this project on their own and they were proposing just 1 or 2 bedrooms versus somebody that was looking for $500,000 for the phone to have 1, 2, or 3 bedrooms, you know what I mean? It's just, I wouldn't want to handcuff us on that one by a score, because 10's a big number, especially when you look at the whole financial aspect being 10 points, that whole category together. So I don't know. We got to get some consensus here for staff. I know we're throwing a bunch of things here, Mr. Spear, but do you have any guidance for me on how we can give you clear direction on this one? Versus we have a bunch of different opinions, and I think no one's arguing anyone's opinion right now by any means, but, or is this just something that you've got the spirit through the notes from Mr. Knopper does a great job doing, that you'd like to just rework this and then present it back to council? What works for you?
How about Your Worship, that we'll just look, unfortunately, we are confined because of the way the total marks have to be spread out because of the RFP. But I think we can kind of balance them. We've heard what you're saying, and I agree, they're all excellent points. But maybe this is one of those things that we can do across email, that once we get a draft 2 tomorrow, we can send it to you. And if everyone's okay, it's, you know, we're not grading the thing over email. We're just saying, is this matrix work for everybody? Once that's done, we can fire it off with the original packages or of the packages, and then we can start getting to work to get this thing figured out.
Unless someone objects, let's do it that way. Obviously, it's not going to be, you know, when you get to 1 or 2 or 3 points on certain things, it's not going to be perfect. But I will say that all these categories are really well thought out. So I don't, Mr. Knopper, Mr. Gopin, who developed this? Both of you? I'm just,
Through you, your worship, it was originally developed through the RFP process, and then this was scaled through discussion between staff to come up with the scoring matrix that you have.
I just wanted to say excellent job of capturing the categories and the things that are important. It's just really the only thing we're looking is just to shift a little bit of weight. Really, that's all it is. And I think whatever you come up with on hearing the spirit of council's comments, I think we'll be confident that we can go ahead. At the end of the day, I'm making assumptions because I don't know what the 2 proposals are, but I bet you it'll probably become pretty clear which one's the better fit for that area. But I could be mistaken. I know nothing of either of them at this point. So anyone else want to add? Because I know we could talk about the weights all day. Councillor Neal.
Thank you, your worship. Yeah, I just wanted to, again, kind of reiterate what you just said. And again, I don't know if it's possible where it's tied to the RFP or not, but the one thing that did jump out at me was that the financial merit only accounts for 25 points versus the 75 for the technical merit. That seemed like it was a little skewed to me. Again, personally, I'd like to see a little bit more emphasis put on knowing that we're actually getting a financially stable proposal brought forward. And that, you know, again, that they're not looking for a major handout from the town. They are financially stable. So that was the only concern I really had, or the only thing that jumped out at me, I guess, is putting a little bit more weight on the financials, as opposed to things like the attractive design, which again, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have other avenues to sort of address that, whether it is through the plans or not, but that was my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you and I were sounding very similar there, Councillor Neal. So thanks for adding on to that for sure. Absolutely. I see it the same way. Any other, we can move on at this point, trying to keep us in that 2-hour time frame. I don't know if you can tell. All right, there's nothing else. We'll wrap up that one. We're into new business, which there's nothing. Question period, Mr. Knopper.
Through you, your worship, I haven't received any questions through email. I have forwarded council commentary that has come in. I will note there have been 20 comments on the Facebook postings here. A lot of good discussions when it came to the budget, discussions about the Wharf and the scoring matrix. So if council, you want to take a look at those so you get a feeling of where the public is, would be greatly appreciated. Otherwise, it's back to you, your worship.
Thank you very much, Mr. Knopper. And we're now into councillors and deputy mayor's comments. So any comment from councillor or deputy mayor? Seeing none. Myself, I have none other than thank you again to do 3 drafts. I don't know, Chris, is that I know we got draft 4 coming, but is that a record? Is that, and probably not a record, but in the last 5 years, is that a record?
It's definitely a record. I think one year I had 14 drafts. So, and some of them vitally different. These ones have just been fine tuning. Some of them were completely rewritten in prior years. So council, I appreciate the efficiency that we've made this process this time around. So it's a reflection of you as well as the staff that have been involved too. So thank you.
Thank you, staff. And I know, again, we go through the draft. I know the work there is making those changes. So thank you on that. There's no reason to go to closed session. So I'll be looking for a motion to adjourn, which is waiting for it, Deputy Mayor Akaji, and a seconder, Councillor Heenan. All in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye. And we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.